everybody to Heart of the Wild, the show dedicated to wildlife, all things animals, and the humans that are dedicated to protecting them one story at a time. This episode features not just any story. This is one born of defiance, compassion, and a refusal to accept that the wild should ever be caged. In 1984, Virginia McKenna, Bill Travers, and Will Travers founded the Born Free Foundation. And it was a bold movement to end the exploitation of wild animals and a fight for a future where animals should live free. They should never be caged. For over 4 decades, their mission has driven campaigns to protect wildlife, challenge captivity, and champion what they call compassionate conservation, a belief that every animal matters and they deserve a life of dignity in the wild. But beyond the headlines lies a deeper story of unlikely beginnings, a lesser-known victory, and something that's quietly changed lives and protected species around the world. And then we're here to talk about the origin story. The story itself is far more cinematic, emotional, and unexpected than you might imagine. And guiding us through this story is one of the founders himself. Today we have with us Will Travers, the executive president and co-founder of Born Free, having led the organization from its earliest days to today. Awarded an OBE in 2012 for services to conservation and animal welfare, he has also played key roles in global initiatives, including the Species Survival Network and the Great Ape Survival Partnership. He contributes to the work of the Royal Geographical Society and the IUCN Species Survival Commission. Will is firsthand going to give us his perspective of all of the work that he's done, and he also has been a familiar voice across national and international press, radio, and TV. And now, to share the inspirational story of Born Free, as only he can, I'd like to welcome Will Travers.
Diana, thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Well, it's kind of you to invite me into your very nice studio here in South London.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're loving it here. We've got our nice little background, our green colorscapes, and hopefully it feels inviting so you can...
Inviting and professional.
Be excited to tell your story.
Okay.
Can you take us back to 1984 and tell us a little bit about the moment or moments that you and your family felt like it was really that time to know that Born Free was needed?
Sure. What I'll do is I think I'll take you back even further. I'll take you back
Perfect.
to 1964.
Okay.
When I was just a young child, because that was when my mum and dad went to Kenya with the family, and that's where they made the movie Born Free. They starred in the film Born Free. The human actors. There were other stars. They were the lions. And it was that experience, 10 months on location in Kenya, that transformed their thinking. So much so that after that, they both had very successful acting careers and continued to have them. But my dad started to make wildlife documentaries because he realized there was, as you said in the introduction, a truth to be told and to be explored. No one in those days, I mean, we're talking over 60 years ago, had a real sort of handle on the relationship between wildlife and captivity, or what was going on in the wild and how we needed to, treat that as the front line of conservation. So working with George Adamson, the real George Adamson, whose diaries were the basis for Joy, his wife's amazing book, Born Free, which, by the way, was turned down by every publisher she took it to until she found William Collins at Collins Publishers, and he said, I'll take it. So she thought she was on a losing mission. 21 million copies later, it was a roaring success around the world, and then became this film. Mum and Dad were in the film, had this transformational experience, started being interested in wildlife. And now roll forward a few years, they made a family movie called An Elephant Called Slowly. Fictional story. 2 people go to look after someone's house while he's away having an operation. The house is in Kenya. And the little note on the door said, look after our unusual friends. The unusual friends turn out to be some elephants. And one of those elephants was a little elephant called Poli Poli, which means slowly in Swahili. She had actually originally been caught by the government of the day in Kenya as a gift to the London Zoo. So bringing her into the film for 6 weeks waylaid her trip to London Zoo. Mum, Dad tried to get the Kenyan government to agree to release her back into the wild. It could have been done. And they said they would agree to that, except they would then catch another baby elephant. You only have to imagine the trauma of an elephant family being harassed and chased and then having a baby, a 1-year-old, a 1.5-year-old taken away. And they just couldn't put another elephant family through that. So Poli Poli, with a delay, came to the London Zoo. And I know that they were very tempted to go and see her. But then they kind of made the decision that it would be almost cruel to be on the outside of the enclosure, looking in, calling her name, and she would probably recognize them and be distressed that she couldn't have that relationship that she'd built up over the 6 weeks of filming. So they thought, no, let her find new companions, the keeping staff. They're her family, sadly, for the rest of her life. And then about 10 years later, 10 years after that, we heard that, no more than 10 years, that she'd become very difficult, that there was even a rumor that they might put her down. And
in the zoo.
Yeah. So we kind of investigated. Mm-hmm. And Mum found a place in Southern Africa that would take her. Had she been, released by the zoo, and she could have been returned to the wild at least. It wasn't her native country. It was South Africa. But the zoo said no, she would be poached, even though she'd broken off one of her tusks completely and the other was just a little stump. But they did agree ultimately to move her to Whipsnade. So London Zoo has a sort of sister zoo called Whipsnade, which is more extensive. It's in the country. The enclosures are much bigger.
And that sort of ZSL network.
It's part of the Zoological Society of London, yes. Sure. So, all right, that was the plan. The plan didn't work. She damaged a foot during the kind of loading and testing process, hobbled round for a week. They then gave her a general anesthetic to examine the foot. And then they said she'd lost the will to live. She did not want to come round, did not want to recover. And so they euthanized her inside the elephant house. And it was kind of front page news because she was a famous elephant. London Zoo is a famous zoo. And Mum and Dad had a certain amount of credibility in the public eye. And that's when we kind of sat down, Mum, Dad, myself, and a few others, and we said, is this like just a one-off aberration? It's a tragedy, but maybe we just all go back to doing our things, documentaries, acting, film distribution is what I was doing at the time. Or is there something more to it? And we decided to launch at the time, it was called Zoo Check, a tiny little organization, literally with £1,000, actually £6, £1 each. And then someone gave us £1,000. And we said, okay, let's set up this little organization and see what happens. And the purpose of the organization when it started was to look at what's going on in zoos because it felt like no one was.
And that's what sparked. Is that the series that led up to the bigger movement that you started with Born Free?
Yes. So we established the elephant was euthanized in 1983.
Okay.
We then started the not-for-profit in 1984 called Zoo Check. And then we changed the name in the early 90s, mainly because people ask a very reasonable question is like, well, if you don't like zoos, what do you want? Mm-hmm. And we said, well, we want to keep wildlife in the wild. We think that's where the battle for wildlife is going to be won or lost. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be won or lost with zoos. Mm-hmm. And we were laughed at. And the then director of the London Zoo, who I knew quite well, actually, he said, oh, you'll be a 9-day wonder. You'll just disappear. Well, we're here 42 years later on, and we are bigger and stronger, and I think more vocal than we've ever been. Mm-hmm. And we do now embrace that much bigger agenda, which is what's going on in zoos, but what's going on in the wild, and what can we do to support our own mission, which is to keep wildlife in its natural habitat.
And that's such a perfect sort of thought that I'm having and what you're talking about now is, you started out in sort of checking on what zoos were doing and making sure that there are ethical practices, which I think have evolved so much, I would imagine, because of the work that you're doing. And your organization has evolved as well. So what are some of the ways in which you've gone from, checking on what zoos are doing to then also working with what's going on in South Africa and what's going on with, ethical treatment of animals, both in the wild and in captivity? Like, how has that all become all encompassing, and what wins have you seen as well from some of the work that you've been doing?
The zoo part of it is, for me, deeply frustrating still. When I started out on this journey, I was a very young man. I was 24 years old and I'm now 67. And I thought that we would be able to move the dial on zoos, on the whole concept of zoos within, let's say, 10 years. I thought, give it 10 years, which when you're 24, 10 years seems like a long way off.
It's still today.
Yeah,
I think now I feel like 10 years, you could get a lot accomplished. And I believe that you already have. And
we did
even
get
in
quite
those
a lot.
initial years, yes.
We did get quite. And one of the things that we did on the captivity side of things was we carried out some research on behalf of the European Union. Sadly, the UK is no longer part of the European Union. Maybe that will change. But at the time, the best list of zoos across the whole of the EU was about 350 zoos, which you might think is quite a lot. Well, we found 1,007 by the time we'd completed that part of the research. And subsequently, we've now got a database of about 3,000 zoos across Europe.
So just take a step back from that, does that mean that those that were not on the list were unchecked, essentially?
Yes, because there was no requirement for zoos to be licensed. So our mission at that time was to both identify that there are lots and lots of zoos, and then to ask the European Union, the European Commission, to introduce measures that would require all zoos in all member states to be licensed. It's not perfect because, how strong is the license? What are the provisions in the license? But to have a licensing system means you have something to go into battle with.
That just feels such a low bar. You need to have some kind of, you need to have some kind of regulations in place, some kind of systems in place to make sure these animals are being treated fairly.
Treated well, and that that zoos as a whole subscribe to a educational agenda, subscribe to a conservation agenda. So they're not just centers of entertainment, confining wild animals for what do we do on a Saturday afternoon? We go to the zoo, kind of thing.
Sure.
And so I think that was a massive win to get all 3,000 plus zoos in the European Union and of course the UK now as well licensed. And the licensing process.
I'm sorry, how long did that take?
We started the research in 1987, 88, and the directive came in 2002.
Okay.
So you can see these things take 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah, it takes a really
took me a
long
bit to
time.
do math, but okay.
Yeah, and I'll give you another example of just how long things can take, because it's another example around captivity. I started working with my Born Free colleagues on the issue of wild animals in circuses in the United Kingdom. Started working on that in 1994.
Okay.
And it became illegal to use wild animals in circuses in the United Kingdom in 2020.
Oh my gosh.
It's 26 years of relentless effort. So sometimes there are quick wins, relatively speedy wins. And sometimes you just have to understand that in this business, you are in for the long haul. You're actually in for life.
I feel that, I'm new at working with amazing organizations such as yourselves to highlight those stories. This has been since the end of last year for me, but I feel like this is my lifelong work.
Good.
I'll never be able to go back from this.
You can't escape.
I'm in this for life. I don't see how you couldn't be though. But the circus pieces, it makes my heart hurt. I remember being a young child and going to the circus and seeing the animals performing and thinking to myself as like a 6-year-old that this doesn't look right. This doesn't feel right to me. This feels wrong, even without knowing.
And that view is shared by so many people. I mean, the reason, in a sense, that the use of wild animals in circus in the UK came to an end was a number of different pressures. Yes, there was the sort of parliamentary legislative pressure, but there was also the fact that fewer and fewer people were turning up and going to the circus. More and more cities and councils were preventing circuses from operating on council-owned land. So they didn't have the venues.
Okay.
They didn't have the support of the public in the way that they had years and years ago. I mean, I am old enough to remember that one of the New Year's television treats on television was the circus. We used to tune in. I mean, not we used to tune in, but people used to tune in to watch the Big Top Spectacular on New Year's Day.
Yeah.
And of course, when that went, and then the council says, no, you can't put up your tents on our land. And then the public start going, nah, not that interested. And then the government is going, well, yeah, we're not that happy with this either. And we're pushing, along with our friends at the RSPCA and Animal Defenders International. It was a really concerted effort to get that over the line. And now we have. But interestingly, there was another form of circus that we helped bring to an end way in advance of the terrestrial animals in the Big Top. And that was the water circus, or as people call it, the dolphinarium.
In the US, I think it's similar to SeaWorld.
Exactly.
Okay.
So yes, around the world, you'll have dolphinariums with performing dolphins. You'll have orca, killer whales. I don't call them killer whales because that's a name that makes you, sends a frisson of fear and excitement through you. And it shouldn't.
Yeah.
They're the
negative connotation.
Exactly. And they're the largest member of the dolphin family.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They're not a whale. They're not a great whale. They're the largest dolphin.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's such a fascinating fact.
There you are. Pub quiz.
Thanks.
You'll win.
If anyone's going to a pub quiz, you need to talk to Will.
Yeah. So we used to have quite a number of captive dolphin performing shows in the UK. Some sedentary, some in fixed locations, some had actually moved around. We even had here in London, there was a show in London's West End where there was a pool on stage and young ladies wearing bikinis swam in the pool with dolphins, and the dolphins took off the bikinis. It was an adult show.
That's just wild, though. Like
they smeared fish paste on the bikinis, and the dolphins.
I was just going to ask you how would they train?
Another pub quiz.
Okay,
but seriously, I mean, it's kind of bizarre and disgusting and exploitative of the animals and of the people, in my view, at the same time.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got to a point in the late 1980s, very early 1990s, where there were very few dolphinariums still in operation. There was one in Brighton, there was one in Morecambe, and there was one in Flamingoland in Yorkshire in the north of England.
Okay.
And everything else had closed down. So there were about 7 or 8 dolphins left. And I remember being approached by the owner of the one dolphin in Morecambe. And he said, I don't want to do this anymore. Was
that like an ethical thing for him, or was it just, it wasn't being?
Well, the government had said, if you're going to keep dolphins, we're not going to ban the keeping of dolphins. What we're going to do is say that the pool has to be this big and it has to be this deep. And that was going to require an investment by all the remaining facilities of millions of pounds in order to meet the new standards. Well, a bit like the circuses, the number of people going was on the gentle decline. The government comes in with new regulations, which are going to be super expensive. So this gentleman got in touch with me and said, I want out. Will you take my dolphin? And I'm thinking, sure, of course, not having a clue what that really meant.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had some negotiations and we worked out how we would resolve it from a ownership and legal position. So we found ourselves, in law, and we had to go to the High Court about this, the owner of this dolphin. And then there were 2 more dolphins in Yorkshire, and we found ourselves the owners of those 2 dolphins as well. So long story short and slightly condensed, we ended up taking 3 of the last captive dolphins from the UK to the Turks and Caicos Islands in the Caribbean, and then releasing them into the wild after a 6-month deprogramming mission. And I should explain what I mean by deprogramming. So there was a famous vet who used to advise places that kept dolphins in captivity. And he told me that the way you get a dolphin in captivity to eat dead fish, because dolphins don't eat dead fish really in the wild, is you drain the pool, you grab the dolphin, you ram dead fish down its throat, and you do that for 10 days. And the dolphin just goes, okay, I give up, and eats dead fish. But what we're trying to do when you take a dolphin back to the wild is to get it to eat live fish again. Now, the dolphin has kind of become lazy because the fish just turns up, it eats the dead fish. To work for your food is now not something that they're familiar with, which is why it takes so long to deprogram them from this captive existence to get them fit and ready to stand a fighting chance of surviving in the wild.
That is such an integral story to understand, because I don't know if I think many of our listeners will understand that certain animals cannot go back into the wild. They cannot be rewilded. Sure. Big cats, for example. For sure. We've talked a lot about big cats, but the fact that I was under the impression that certain amphibians or fish or dolphins were able to go back into the wild with no issue, but that isn't necessarily the case.
Well, it's not just not necessary. It's absolutely not the case with dolphins.
Yeah.
Because so much of their survival behavior is a learned behavior. They're this highly intelligent mammal that lives in a social environment, is from a small infant dolphin is taught, trained, shown by mum how to, in very similar to big cats, in a sense,
how to hunt,
similar to elephants. It's so much learned behavior. Of course, there are instincts that sit underneath it, but if a dolphin doesn't know how to catch live fish, the dolphin's going to starve to death within a month. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and it seems like the ways in which you just described learning how to eat dead fish, it's not a very kind process.
It's absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing is, but I think that the fact that you were able to take these dolphins and sort of, as you described, that process that you were able to reprogram them and then save them and bring them back to Turks and Caicos, that is incredible. So kudos to you and the work you're doing. And I was curious if there are certain animals, certain things that you've done where you feel like, wow, we've really made an impact. We've really done it. We've really helped these animals, certain species, for example. Are there things that really stand out to you? To me, that story that you just told would be one example. Is that the example, or are there other examples that you can think of?
There's lots, in a sense, there's lots and lots of examples. When you've been, doing this for this long, your career, your life is littered with big wins and small wins and things where it worked and things where perhaps it didn't work as the way you thought it would. I can pick up on a few. So for example, there were some marine turtles that were, caught from the wild. I think they were accidentally caught, but they were caught from the wild and they ended up in an aquarium in the north of Sardinia. Sardinia, the island in the Mediterranean. It's an Italian island. And they were in that aquarium for decades. I mean, for many, many, many years. And we'd been writing and saying, this isn't a nice environment. I mean, literally the tank was probably no bigger than this studio. And what kind of life is that?
Any enclosed space, I feel like, for an animal is just not a life to.
Yeah. I mean, there were some interesting discussions about, is it possible to have any animals in captivity where they don't really recognize that they're in captivity because the environment that you're able to provide is as diverse and as large? I use the example of leafcutter ants. I mean, if you have a room like we're in now, full of, detritus and jungle material and leaves and moss and then blah, blah, blah. I don't think leafcutter ants are going to sit there and go, well, this isn't the wild.
I actually love that. I love that point, and I love that example.
And you would see all the natural behaviors of leafcutter ants. Yeah. Move much further up, as it were, in terms of scale and size and everything, and you immediately start hitting real barriers. And also you hit a problem with people's understanding. Mm-hmm. So someone I know explained to me, he said, why, when you look at lizards in a captive environment in a zoo, so in a tank, you usually see a lizard. And he said, look at the nose, and you'll almost always see that it is scarred and bruised. It might even be bloody. And you've got to ask yourself, why is that the case? And he said that the reason that it's that in that state is because the lizard can't understand why there is a barrier of glass that it can't get through. So it doesn't learn and go, oh, that hurt, I'm not doing that again. It just keeps on going, bashing itself and its nose against glass, which it can't comprehend, and ends up with, quite significant injuries. I said, I'd never even thought of it like that before.
And you know what? We'll never, if you're listening and you've seen or you own a lizard or you've seen a lizard in captivity, I don't think you'll ever be able to, not think about that again.
Think about that. Please think about that. And please don't buy exotic pets. So don't have exotic animals as pets. There's so many non-exotic animals that need a home, a loving home and care. Mm-hmm. Please don't have exotics. But back to my turtles.
Yes.
We've been sending letters to the authorities for ages saying, oh, please, come on, can we do something? Eventually, we get a letter saying, yeah, we're going to release the turtles. Okay. What? So they tagged the turtles. They put satellite tags on them, and they released the turtles. Sardinia is an island that's sort of roughly shaped like a brick on end, narrow and long. And the turtles are up in the top left-hand corner as you look at the brick. One of them swam right round the bottom of the island. It's 160 kilometers long, the island, and all the way back up the other side. Another one swam all the way over to the Balearic Islands, the Spanish islands near Spain. And the third swam all the way off through the Straits of Gibraltar out into the Atlantic to the Azores. That's 4,500 kilometers. Their innate instinct to swim was as intact as it could ever be. Mm-hmm. And now I think of it as what was life like when they could only swim, say, 3 meters in any direction for 15 years.
Is that how long they were captive?
Yeah. That blows my mind.
And that is a testament again to the work that you're able to do for these animals. And they otherwise would never have had those experiences. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the distances that they were able to go as well was almost like a freedom swim. They went even further than they otherwise would have because they were able to.
It could, and we'll never know.
I know.
And in a sense, that's the exciting, I think that's part of the excitement, is not always knowing the answer, but giving the animal the opportunity to live their life. I have a different example, which I think also shows that. I was contacted by an ex-hunter from northern Tanzania, and he said, I have an elephant in my little mini zoo at my lodge. And I realized she shouldn't be here. She's sort of 20 years old. I have had her since she was a calf, and she should really go back to the wild. Can you help?
I have so many questions about that, but I hope.
And Born Free's reaction to most things is yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes not to our benefit, but we are the organization that does like to say, yes, we will try.
Yeah.
So anyway, again, long story short, you've got an elephant that's been in captivity for like 18 years, 20 years. I then got in touch with some friends in the media, and they said, this is a great story. We should tell this story. Now, that's a high risk, because if something goes wrong, the subject of your story may not survive, and you don't have a story of inspiration. You have a story of tragedy to tell. But I thought, well, we should tell the story, kind of warts and all. And then I contacted Martin Clunes, and he said he'd be happy to present the show. And I contacted my friends at the Kenya Wildlife Service, who had a truck which could move an elephant, which we'd given them in previous years. And they said, well, we'd be happy to help out, but you can only have the truck for 3 days. And then I spoke with another friend, Tony Fitzjohn, who was down in Tanzania and was masterminding operations in this huge national park called Mkomazi. And everyone said yes. So Nina came from something that was twice the size of a tennis court where she'd been. Gosh. And she went to...
For 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, and she went to Tony's place where he'd built like a stockade.
Yeah.
And the extraordinary thing is that the doors to the stockade to the national park were open, and she could have just arrived, got out and gone. And she went to the now open door to that line that's not even a real line, and just stood there for a month, kind of working out, do I do this? Do I not do this? You can just imagine what she might be thinking. I've been in this thing twice the size of a tennis court for nearly 20 years. And now there's this door that's open and I can just go. And I don't need permission. Anyway, she then went and she left and she hovered around Tony's base there, his headquarters. And then she disappeared. Then she came back with a boyfriend. And then she came back with a calf.
Oh.
And showed her calf off to Tony, who's very sadly passed on, but to Tony and his wife, Lucy, and the kids. And our hearts are throughout this just racing because it's all so exciting and it's going on over a period of years. But then, and to be fair, then reality strikes. She then died in childbirth for her second calf.
Okay.
So you kind of go, she could have had another 20 or 30 years in the 2 tennis courts.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd have been fed every day. She would have been bored out of her mind, but she wouldn't have risked anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like us. We could get a hotel room. I don't mean you mean. We could go and get a hotel room, live in a hotel, food's delivered 3 times a day. Your favorite wine is delivered. That's your tipple. You can watch TV, but you can never leave.
Yeah. What kind of life is that?
Is that a life worth living? And I would say no. I'd much rather risk it. Go downstairs, cross the road, could get run over, go to the local pub, could get food poisoning. I want a life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's anthropomorphic. And if it's anthropomorphic, I frankly don't really care. Anthropomorphic is where you sort of put human values onto an animal's existence. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, I think like this, so the animal thinks like this. And lots of scientists go, no, you shouldn't do that.
I try not to, but I love animals and I can't help but put some of my own sort of like values and beliefs and things on them.
Feelings.
And feelings, exactly. Mm-hmm. And what I was thinking when you were telling that story is it almost came super full circle with Pole Pole. Mm-hmm. And, your family tried to help Pole Pole and...
Didn't work.
It didn't, unfortunately.
But it inspired something.
Exactly. And you helped this other elephant be able to go out and live and create another life as well.
Yeah. And have a life, even if it was only for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
5 years, I think it was. She had this other life full of the adventures of being a wild elephant. I mean, I don't know if you have a dog or a cat or companion animal.
I do, yeah.
I have a rescue dog. We know when that dog is happy or sad. Mm-hmm. Or intimidated or frightened. We know.
Mm-hmm.
So if we know it about our dog, our companion animal, that's in some people's books, that's anthropomorphic. In my book, it's empathy. Mm-hmm. It's a real understanding. And why is that empathy not available to elephants in zoos or big cats in zoos or primates in zoos? Why do we have to go, no. You can't be anthropomorphic. You can't, layer your own feelings and values on that, because that's not what we do.
So it's funny when you just were talking about the elephant, because my dog Eloise, when we were living in New York before we moved to London, she actually was always on a lead for the first 8 years of her life. Mm-hmm. And so I took her to Hyde Park for the first time when we moved to London, took her off her lead, and she was just completely confused. She had no idea what to do. So actually for several months, similar to what you were talking about, she just never would go away from me. She would never leave my side.
And that dependency issue, which is what you're describing, that sort of uncertainty, dependency issue. I'll give you so I've talked about Nina, the elephant, being in this new space, but not being kind of brave enough to cross an imaginary line. There's no fence. There's just an open gate. Mm-hmm. But also when we moved the dolphins to the Caribbean, the first dolphin that we moved, we put him into an 80-acre lagoon with a sea fence, a netted sea fence. And he found a little space that was probably 25, 30 feet by 30 feet, which was a little deeper. And for the first week, he never left it. He swam round because that's the size of the pool he came from.
Why do you think that is, that animals sort of, even when they do have their freedom finally, they stick with what they know?
Because they've been institutionalized in so many ways. Their food generally turns up at the same time. The guy lets them out of the indoor house roughly at the same time, puts them back into the indoor house at the same time, chooses the companions that they shall have, chooses whether or not they shall keep any progeny that they may produce. Do they keep them or do they send them to another zoo? The choices in life are very limited in a zoo environment. And I think that's one of the tragedies of it. It has denied animals that opportunity for self-expression. And we as humans, here I'm going to be super anthropomorphic, so I'll wait for the emails. But
it's okay, we can take it.
Yeah, bring it on.
Come at us.
Come on. So the thing is this: what do we do to people who break the rules? Short of executing them, which thank God we don't do in the UK, the most severe thing we can do is take away their liberty. Potentially for the rest of their natural life. We lock them up because we've recognized that one of the single most important values that means so much to us, love and freedom, are like the two things that matter most. A life without love is desperate, and a life without freedom is denied. And we take those things away when we punish people. And yet we put animals into a life without freedom, and we call it education or we call it entertainment. It seems completely perverse that we do that, in my view. And so I would rather the short, sometimes ends brutally, life in the wild with all of the choices, opportunities, and challenges that represents than a longer life in a sterile, boring, choiceless environment.
You're making me think about things differently. And I'm curious about your take on two different things. One is, do you think there is a place for zoos or animals in captivity, whether it be for research or, any sort of part in the chain of how we view wildlife and that whole entire function? And then secondly, how do you feel people should be thinking about their companion animals? Because now I'm thinking about my dog on a lead and I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I trained her to not be able to run around.
I'll do it in reverse order. So my dog, Susie, is a rescue from Romania. And she's had a brutal life.
Yeah.
She's got incredible scar tissue around her neck where she was chained. She's had cancer twice. Her tail's been taken off as close to the spine as you can get without literally hitting the spinal column. Her teeth have been gone from the front. So she's had a really tough life. And she adores people. She absolutely adores people, but she can't stand dogs. And my guess is that she's been forcibly put into environments with male dogs and she's been bred from, and she finds this incredibly stressful.
Mm-hmm.
So while in my garden, she can run around to her heart's content. And if I take her anywhere for a walk outside of my garden, she's always on a lead. She's always on a leash.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want her to put herself in a dangerous situation where she might get injured, because she will take on any dog. Little ones is sort of like snacks, but big
That
dogs,
would be mine.
she will have, boom, she'll go at, Ridgebacks. She'll go at huge dogs
Mm-hmm.
because her self-defense mechanism is attack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So don't beat yourself up about having a dog on a leash. It's about the life of your companion animal as a whole that matters. Mm-hmm. And you have responsibilities that the dog doesn't know or understand.
Mm-hmm.
The safety of the dog, the safety of other dogs, the safety of people, all of those things are your responsibilities. So you must navigate that yourself. And then, can we keep any animals in zoos at all? Well, I've mentioned that it might be possible to have, colonies of leafcutter ants doing what they do, and I suspect they don't know that they're in a captive environment. But for you mentioned research. So much of the research that does go on in zoos is research about keeping animals in zoos.
I see.
It does not really have much applicability in the wild. And if you think about the great groundbreaking pieces of research that have been done, mm-hmm. I think of the work of the late Jane Goodall, mm-hmm. the late Baruti Galdikas, the late Diane Fossey, Cynthia Moss, Winnie Kiiru, Ian Redmond, have been based on the long-term studies of animals in their natural habitat. Those have been the breakthrough moments mm-hmm. when we've understood about their social lives, their Dr. Paul Spong with orca.
We had Tim Clutton-Brock on with meerkats as well. Similar.
What we really know about meerkats or gorillas or chimps or orangs or orca or elephants or lions is from people who have spent decades studying them mm-hmm. in the wild to build up this rich picture mm-hmm. of the life of the animal in question.
Yes.
Social life, individual life, challenges, risks, everything, absolutely everything. And I suspect that what we've learned by studying and keeping animals in zoos is how to study and keep animals in zoos.
And that's, counter to obviously everything we're talking about and the well-being of animals in general and ensuring that they can live wild and free.
And importantly, what does it mean for us? What does it do for our understanding and appreciation and respect for animals? Mm-hmm. I think that we are diminished when what we take home is what we've learned by looking at animals in captivity. Mm-hmm. I don't think that inspires us. The zoo industry is very fond of saying that they get more than 600 million visits a year mm-hmm. around the world, people going to zoos. Now, that's not 600 million individuals because there's repeat visits and all the rest of it. But let's be fair. Hundreds of millions of people mm-hmm. go to zoos around the world. If zoos were this extraordinary stimulus for compassionate conservation, for protecting natural habitats, for inspiring us to get to grips with the challenges faced by the natural world, wow, that would be a huge army of people that I could count on. Mm-hmm. And the answer is, in my opinion, and from my experience, I would say it has not had that impact at all.
Right. People
don't come away from the zoo saying, damn, what can I do? They go, okay, afternoon over.
Yeah, I think, I know we've had on a guest from ZSL, mm-hmm. and I think there are certain instances where people are hoping that would be the case, but as you're saying, generally it's not. The large populace of people going are not coming away to think,
and of course,
what can I do?
It's a generalization. Of course,
certainly.
Guaranteed, if I went to my friends at ZSL, and we get on fine, we work together on certain issues, particularly around wildlife trade, and they will be able to find individuals who have been inspired by their time at the zoo and say, well, I wouldn't really have got into this had I not been taken to the zoo as a kid by my dad or my mum.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yes.
But I think that's the exception, not the rule. And I think if we could just continue to perpetuate the captive exploitation of wildlife, we are going to lose the war for wildlife, which we need to fight.
I know. And there's never been more of an important time for people to be advocating for animals, for wildlife in the wild. So I do understand fully. We're almost at time, which is crazy. I feel like there's so much more that we can talk about. We've almost been here for an hour, which is insane. What I do want to talk about, I have our final sort of segment that we always do, which is having a guest guess an animal noise, which I would love for you to do.
You're going to get that wrong.
Don't worry. I am going to make it somewhat easy, but it's fine if you get it wrong as well. I am going to just ask you one last question, which is, we've talked a lot about the incredibly inspirational work of the Born Free Foundation, so many wins that you've seen, things that haven't even been, massively out in, the media. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how people can help your organization. If I think there's so many people listening that are huge animal advocates that love the sort of singular work that they might be doing themselves, how can they help Born Free Foundation if they want to?
Yeah, well, two or three quick things. The first thing I would say is, firstly, I am enormously privileged to have led an extraordinary team of people for more than 4 decades. The team has changed over time, but we've never had, in my view, as strong a team as we have now. We have 40 or so people in the United Kingdom. We have 60 people in Ethiopia. We have another 40 people in Kenya. We have a dozen or so people in South Africa. We have one person in India. We have one person in Cameroon. We have a sister organization in the United States.
Got a big U.S. audience. So
United States, go look up Born Free USA, please.
Yes.
And that would be my second thing. Do find out more about us, because we're not like a one-hit wonder.
Mm-hmm.
We're not an organization that only deals with, make it up, pangolins.
Sure.
We deal with pangolin issues, but we deal with a whole range of different species in different environments around the world, and at the policy level on a massive other issues. Wildlife trade being one. I mean, one of the things I'm kind of proud about from an organizational point of view is that we were one of the leading organizations to call for an end to the international ivory trade. Way back in 1989, I drove a car from the UK with 600,000 individually signed petition sheets to Switzerland, to the meeting that was deliberating on this issue. And along with Environmental Investigation Agency and many others, we got it over the line. We got it. And it's been really hard ever since. It's come and gone, and people have tried to reintroduce the ivory trade, but...
Can you just tell people what animals that would directly impact? I mean, elephants and...
Elephants, for sure.
Yep.
And elephants was the focal point for us all, because the late Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton, who was an elephant champion and also a friend, he identified that between 1979 and 1989, the number of African elephants halved, went down from 1.3 million to 600,000, which is why I had that 600,000 petition.
Mm-hmm.
It was one name for every elephant that we believed to be alive in Africa. And closing down the international ivory trade in elephant ivory was the start of this. But more recently, much more recently, the UK introduced its own legislation around commercial trade in ivory. And it had originally just focused again on elephant ivory. But we, and by that I do mean Born Free, had petitioned the government to include other species. So hippo ivory, walrus ivory, narwhal ivory, orca ivory are all now included in the terms of reference of the legislation to make it almost impossible for those to be traded commercially as well. And people talk a lot about elephants, which they should. They should talk about elephants, because elephants represent something incredibly important. You can't have wild elephants without the wild.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have elephant families roaming the plains of Africa or the forests of Africa if there are no plains or forests to roam.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like a It's a keystone species, and the cascade effect of protecting elephants is that you also bring protection to many other species in that habitat. If we can do that for elephants, then why aren't we focused on hippo when the number of hippo is 1/3 of the number of elephants?
It is, I think, such a misunderstood component of the ivory trade because, I mean, elephants are so beloved. They're, I think, just like a logo, like a, a standalone sort of, I'm trying to think of the word, but they are the animal.
They're totemic.
Yes, they're the animal that everyone thinks about when you think about the savannah, when you think about wildlife in general. But ivory is impacting so many other animals, as you mentioned, which I think is a misunderstood.
And I mean, taking it right back to your audience, pick up a child's primary reader and go, A is for apple. What's E for?
Elephant.
Thank you. That's what is lodged in your brain.
It is, yeah.
That's how we start our little tiptoe into the world of nature. Is we say L is for lion and H is for hippo, I hope, and E is for elephant. E is always for elephant. E is not for any. No one says E is for egg.
I don't think of anything else.
They just don't. So take that simple and pure message and translated. You ask what people can do. Well, they can find out about my organization. They can find out about Born Free in the United States, Born Free in the United Kingdom, Born Free in Kenya, Born Free in Ethiopia. You can find out about all those things. But think also of nature as a whole and think about what you can do for nature. You can think about your carbon footprint, but you could also do little things. Even if you live in an apartment that has no garden, but it has a window and a window box, you could just plant something that is attracting pollinators that could be good. It'll be good for your soul, I tell you that, but it'll be good for nature as well.
Yeah.
There's so many things. Our choices as consumers can move mountains. The trouble is that we are distracted by all sorts of other global issues which demand our time and attention and are often extremely depressing and very difficult to deal with. And I said this at an event just recently. I said, the problem with our approach to things is we say, look, nature's super important, but I have to do this first. I'll come back to nature later. I'm going to do this first because I have to get this done. And it's going to take 3 or 4 years. We'll do that. But I'm coming back to nature. By the time you come back, it won't be the nature you left. It will be diminished. It will be reduced. It may not be able to recover. So protect nature now has to be our mantra.
That's such an inspirational way to think about things. And also, I do believe that people feel that not only when they come back is it not going to be the same, but if we don't do our part, even though it feels so overwhelming and that if we're, the collective isn't working together, so it doesn't matter, that's not the case. Everyone doing their own singular part makes up a big impact.
Exactly. And there's that lovely story, which I'm sure maybe many of your guests will know as well, with the two people walking down the beach and the sand is littered with starfish. And one of them is reaching down and picking up a starfish and tossing it back into the water. And then another one, and he throws it back, and then he picks up another. And his friend turns to him and says, there are thousands of starfish on the beach. What difference does it make? And the other guy reaches down, picks up and said, well, it made a difference for that one and that one.
I love that.
And so we can all do something. And, I tell that story quite often. Every time I tell it, I get that tingly thing because it's so true. Yeah. We can all do something, and our failure will be if we don't.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you for all of the singular impacts that you have made to all the animals that you talked about today. And then in doing so, the bigger collective impact that you've made on many different species. I can't even tell you how much it means to me and how inspirational it is to me. And seeing the work that you've done at the Born Free Foundation has helped launch this podcast in general. So if it's helped me, I think it's helped so many of our listeners today just by hearing your story.
You're very kind. And thank you for having me on and having Born Free on.
Of course, I can't tell you how happy I am to have you. I just really hope that by hearing your story, a lot of our listeners will be moved to do the same. I think that they will, for sure.
Go for it.
All right. We didn't do the guessing of the animal noise.
Oh, no.
We're going to put this in. We're going to put this in probably before that little ending there. So, but don't be nervous. Okay.
I'm not cheating.
Okay. It's honestly, it has to do with what we talked about.
Oh, gosh.
Are you ready?
Leaf cutter ant noise.
I should have done that.
No, don't.
This one, of course. Hold on. This is an
Explore your
YouTube kills me. Okay, ready?
Oh, God, what could it be?
I told you it was going to be easy.
It's an elephant.
Yay!
Yeah.
There we go.
Fantastic.
Okay. Good job.
That
You
was
killed
easy.
it. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening and hearing the incredible story of the Born Free Foundation and the founding from Will and his family. As always, please let the heart of the wild inspire not just awe, but action. And we will see you very soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.